Welcome to the God Academy podcast.
You stand in the presence of Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne, rightful Queen of the Andals and the First Men, protector of the Seven Kingdoms, the Mother of Dragons, the Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, the Unburnt, the Breaker of Chains.
Daenerys Targaryen flew on her dragon and destroyed, decimated the entire city that she wanted to rule. With one solitary dragon, she beat all the defenses. We have here a retired Air Force Colonel, Dan Mosqueda. Hi Dan, to talk to us about her strategy, her Air Force strategy, and what we can learn from actual Air Force strategy about what she did, what she should have done, what she shouldn't have done. Hi Dan, how are you?
I'm great, Gil. How are you doing today?
Very happy to have you. We've been talking about doing it, trying to do this for a very, very long time.
And continually gets interrupted, canceled for many reasons. But it's really great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. I was a space and missile officer in the Air Force, so I wasn't a pilot.
Space and missile, okay.
Yeah.
The space mission of the Space and Missile Systems Center is to research, develop, test, acquire, and sustain military space vehicles, satellites, and space control systems. We also furnish the United States and Allied forces with ground, shipboard, and airborne equipment to access those satellites in support of military operations around the world.
I retired from the US Air Force as a lieutenant colonel, actually. So that's lower than a colonel, but anyway, it's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. It's all right.
Okay.
And while I was in, I did get a master's in Airpower theory. So we looked at how do you fight an air war, and the interesting thing about this particular degree was we went back into the earliest days of flight, practically back to Wilbur and Orville Wright, and even before that from balloons.
I remember Trump said something about airports in the Civil War. He didn't go back to about air war in the Civil War. No, there wasn't there. Okay.
In June of 1775, it took over the airports. It did everything it had to do, and at Fort McHenry, under the rocket's red glare, it had nothing but victory.
Yeah, there were no airplanes. They may have used some balloons, but definitely no airplanes.
No, the president said so I'm sure you must be wrong.
I must be, sorry.
You must be, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us, through the eyes of someone with some expertise in Air Force strategy, when you watched this episode and the way that she used her airplane, for lack of a better word, with all the anti-aircraft weapons over there, no other airplanes in sight, she has like total air superiority. What were you thinking about the way that she was using it when she was fighting or burning all these scorpions?
Well, is it okay if I step back just a little bit to...
It's perfect.
What goes through my mind is when, they were basically shot down and she loses. Yeah. If we even go back to where they're north of the wall.
7. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So she loses a lot of her capability. And my immediate thought then was she really didn't think through very carefully how she should use them. And especially, here's the thing, Tyrion, for instance, who he drinks and he reads and he knows stuff, right? And I'm thinking, if her ancestors were flying these dragons and took over the whole continent, it seems like he would have learned how did they go about doing it, right? And advised her. Otherwise, that's why we go back into the early 1900s for any Air Force, because the first thing you want to learn is you want to learn all the rules, practice them, know them by muscle memory before you decide you're going to break any of the rules.
Right. And maybe you want to learn from other people's mistakes. And
Oh yeah, for
successes.
sure, for sure.
But I'm not sure it's Tyrion's fault or her fault. I think it's the fault of Dan and Dave, the creators of Game of Thrones.
Well, that's probably very true, and part of their problem is I don't think that they relied on enough expertise to help them understand how this would have really gone down.
I think you're being very generous. I don't think they relied on any expertise, but I don't know. Could be wrong. So,
I did see them though. They're still touting Drogon, on another HBO show.
Yeah.
I don't want to give any spoilers. So
no, that was an annoying part. But let's
move on from there. I'm going to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt for North of the Wall, because there's no way she could have known that. Oh man, it's been a while, Gil, since I watched it. What's the name of the bad guy? That's terrible.
The Night King.
Yeah,
No, I think it's like emotionally maybe you blocked it out because
maybe.
So he threw. She couldn't know that he was such a javelin thrower that could have.
I'm going to let that one slide. But when she went down and they were flying over, it really demonstrated her unhinged mental status even before we get to the last episode, and maybe a mix of her arrogance, because I don't even know what her military objective was, because in reality what was she trying to do? So they fly over, they get
one down
in bad shape, one down, and now she's down to just Drogon, right? To be fair, in the final episode, she does do the first thing you got to do to establish true air supremacy, and that is she takes out all of those scorpions. Mm-hmm. In most norms of warfare, you're going to stick to what we call counterforce targets, which means something that can hit back. Instead, she went after what we call counter value targets, and a counter value target would generally be non-military, non-intelligence related things, because she could have easily gone in and did what she did, taken out all of the necessary military targets, and then just walked in and taken the city. So
it's hers.
Yeah, it's hers. So fundamentally, if you look at that last episode on its own,
second to last.
Second to the last episode on its own, she did what she needed to do, except she didn't need to be a war criminal, but she was very successful. So she did learn from the mistakes that she made.
Is it usually that easy for one aircraft to get rid of dozens and dozens of anti-aircraft missiles? What can we learn from that about the way that it's actually happening in real-world battles?
Well, I mean, that's very unrealistic. You're not going to do it. Even if when you step back and look at the initial raids on Iraq after Saddam Hussein took over Kuwait. Mm-hmm. So this is the first Gulf conflict.
1991.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We went in with, squadrons of stealth aircraft to do what she did when she burned up all the Scorpions. Well, we did the same thing. We went in and we took out all of his anti-aircraft. So we went after what we call the centers of gravity. And so she should have softened the city up prior to what she did, so that, her last thing would have just been a walk in the park. Because if you have good air supremacy, we do our work so that then the army can just walk in and do the easy job of cleaning it up, and then somebody else has to do the difficult job, as we learned in Marine, of ruling it later on.
Okay, that was interesting. I would like to hear more about, as much as you can, whatever, all things considered, about the way that you used the Air Force in Iraq. Can you elaborate about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So the whole idea was that, and in general, this is just how you would do it. Even in ancient times, I mean, you want to get in quietly, and the concept is to soften up your targets, and you want to take hard targets and make them soft targets. Hard targets are the ones that are very difficult to take out. So, for instance, if you went to an airport in, say, Tel Aviv, where it's very highly guarded, versus, let's say, an airport in a more rural part of the world where the threat maybe isn't as great, the other airport would be a soft target. Tel Aviv would be a hard target. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And an example of this, that once the F-117 stealth fighters went in, did their job, then we were able to go in and use the bunker busters. So the idea here is these things went deep down into Saddam's command and control efforts, and we were able to essentially, cut the head off of the snake.
That's the footage that we saw, right? The greenish stuff when you see the bomb falling.
Boom.
Back in the day.
Yep. Back in the day, yep. And we still would use that same kind of thing today. And I think now I want to make sure I'm not getting my Middle East conflicts messed up here, but I know in Afghanistan, I can say it confidently there. These were instances where the Moab was used, the mother of all bombs, which has more power than a nuke, minus any of the radiative effects, and it works by sucking all of the oxygen out, and then everybody inside is, they're just goners. It's not very pleasant.
Doesn't sound very pleasant to be on the receiving end of the mother of all bombs.
It's not. It's not. And,
it's not recommended.
No. And the concept, though, is still valid, that you're going in and you're trying to do everything you can do so that when you finally send in your ground forces, they're not fighting through an implacable enemy that they can't, in the case of King's Landing, they can't get over the walls, they can't get under them, they can't get through the gates. So, right.
Maybe we can talk about famous battles, let's say D-Day, because they didn't have the Air Force to soften up the hard targets. Then they just went in, got shot until they were able to just plow through with endless numbers of dead. Had they been able to use their Air Force, deploy their Air Force earlier, before that, then the whole thing would have looked different.
Completely differently, because what we would have done is we would have gone in and we would have cleaned out all of those pillboxes, that were embedded in the side of the beaches, where the Germans were able to shoot down, with impunity.
Yeah.
And then the other thing we would have done is we would have taken out all of the gun emplacements that were a little bit further back. So, have you seen Band of Brothers?
Of course, yeah.
So, in Band of Brothers, of course, one of the most famous parts of it, actually, were when the Echo or Easy Company gets in and they go in, and remember how they take out those guns at that... at the chateau. It's like I don't know if it was a chateau, but it was maybe it was a church. I forget, but it was
the guys running all over the place.
Yes.
Oh, wow, that was strong. I need to rewatch it. I watched it once, 15, 20 years ago when it came out. Okay, go ahead.
So that is one of the best examples of how you would do that without aircraft, and in fact, that is still taught at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point today. A little fun fact, my wife actually was one of the historical researchers on Band of Brothers.
Nah, really?
Yeah. Yes.
That is a fun fact.
Yeah.
What does she do, your wife? She's a historian?
She's an historian, and she helps authors and people like Tom Hanks and that get their facts straight in their movies. She also did Saving Private Ryan, John Adams. So, and in Saving Private Ryan, what we did there, of course, is going back to how did we do D-Day? Well, we just threw people at it.
Yeah.
Right? Until eventually somebody's going to get through. We've all played video games where, you think you've got all your defenses set up, but if they can throw enough bodies at it, they're going to get through.
It's like zombies, just like World War Z.
World War Z coming into Jerusalem, going up over the wall, So, but
was she happy? Was your wife happy with the way that they portrayed thing like battles in Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan in terms of how historically correct it was?
Well, her actual expertise was in their language and how they spoke. And the idea was so that, somebody in Band of Brothers wouldn't say something that jumped out. So they wouldn't say far out or whatever. And you do get that amazing feeling in all three of those examples of what it might have been like back then. And I think her colleagues on the team who worked on those issues did a really great job. Dale Dye and many others who, really knew what they were doing. They made it realistic. And see that, so if we go back to D&D, that was their biggest problem. If they had spent some money, and we know they had it, they could have really, and look, you still could have had the same kind of ending. She didn't, in the sense that she could have been, destroyed at the end. Okay, sure. There's many ways to do it. It's just that it didn't make a lot of sense other than, she was psychotic. And, the hope is that in any kind of a warfighting organization that you're able to have checks and balances, on your commander-in-chief.
Right. She was like the biggest terrorist in the world. Just like, I'm going to kill all these people just because I can.
Yeah.
But so her strategy, even though, so it wasn't very nuanced in terms of writing, but it was the right strategy to come in and first take care of all the things that can hurt you.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And
no
then,
question. Yeah.
And then it's yours for the taking.
Well, yeah.
There's nothing left to fight you.
So an example of this would be in modern day, you might have a way of testing somebody's defenses and probe in and out. The Russians do it all the time. They come as close to our international airspace over Alaska as they can, and they cause us to scramble fighters and go out and escort them away. Well, when they do that, clearly their goal is to time it, understand it, and know exactly how we're going to react so that if they ever needed to, they could come up with a counter plan to overcome that resistance. So she sort of learned from the episode before.
Yeah.
She went in with much greater speed, much greater ferocity.
And lower.
Lower.
Is that realistic? Is that something that is realistic in terms of the way you use your Air Force, that you go low? Is that better than
Definitely.
Yeah?
Yeah, because there's some great YouTube videos of B-52 bombers, which, they're, I don't know how old those things are. I think they're older than we are. Like 56, well, they're 60-year-old aircraft, so not much older than me, but older than me. And you'll see videos of them skimming the treetops and coming over ridges. And it's
and is
amazing.
And that's not only for whatever radar purposes, whatever you see in the movies. This is also, it's easier to not get hit by anti-aircraft weapons when you're flying low?
It depends. So, yes, it could be. There are other times when, depending on their AAA anti-aircraft artillery that they have, you may want to be very high up and do, high altitude precision
be like out of range.
Well, and if we step back, let's in Game of Thrones, remember the time where Jon flies his dragon really high up above the clouds?
Yeah.
And that was, I don't remember which episode, but it was before all of this.
Yeah,
it was more of, it was like, I think he was doing it more for fun, right?
Yeah.
Like, ooh, this is the wonder and the awe of flying these things, which is understandable, right?
Yeah.
So, but in my mind, when I saw that, I thought, they're teeing this up so that they will be so high up and then do a quick dive down and they won't know what hit them. Only that's not how they did it. They instead came in where they could be seen by God and everybody and paid the price.
And what about, now I'm remembering, in the battle for the dawn or whatever it was, like the third episode where everything was like was dark, like a battle for Winterfell, whatever it was.
Right.
So she couldn't use her air superiority. They couldn't use because of all the smoke and all kinds of, let's call it, there's this term, whatever, all kinds of stuff, whatever, to prohibit,
like chaff and
Okay.
stuff like that.
Okay.
Right?
What's
Yeah,
that?
in other
Explain
words,
a little bit about
well, it wouldn't actually be chaff in that example, but what you do with chaff is you're just shooting out a bunch of pieces of metal, and it confuses radar. Okay.
Is that something that the plane does or the defenses do?
No, that's something that the plane would do when somebody's trying to attack it.
When another plane, though, no? Or,
Right. So,
or also anti-aircraft, stationary anti-aircraft missiles.
No, they would not do that. And but what you're talking about is basically there was just ground cover and fog or smoke or whatever it was, and they just couldn't see where things were in order to go after them.
So that's weather conditions, maybe.
Yeah, that's more probably weather, and of course, again, in modern day, we overcome it using things like a synthetic aperture radar.
What's that?
So a synthetic aperture radar is a type of radar that is able to see through any conditions, and in fact, can even do what we call ground penetrating radar. So yes, it's very interesting. We use it for science, not just the military. And the idea is that with SAR, you're not impacted by what the weather is. You're also not impacted by canopies. So
over trees,
a lot of times,
canopies of trees.
That's right, because you can tune the frequencies to kind of ignore that and tell it, hey, I'm just looking for certain shapes and certain material types.
So what kind of image does the pilot see on the radar that he or she can discern? Okay, this is that, or is it just like all computerized and tells the pilot this is where you should throw the bomb?
Well, so when you look at imagery from that kind of radar, it looks like blobs. But essentially what happens with either the operator or somebody on a different aircraft, like an AWACS, which is a airborne control center, they know how to interpret that imagery to know what they're looking for.
And they tell the pilot this is where whatever coordinates and stuff?
Yes, yep. And then they can, then they have numerous ways of trying to target it. So ideally, you're using really precise GPS coordinates, because back in the first Gulf War, we relied a lot on laser pointing, but the issue with that is it can't penetrate through
fog and
smoke and fog and all that stuff.
And also someone has to be there on the ground to point the laser.
Correct. So, although I want to say there may have been pods that did the laser on board the aircraft too. But regardless, generally you're going to have tipping and cueing of some sort. So Daenerys could have even done that, because surely Tyrion could have gotten spies in there, or even...
Bran. Also, Bran, in the Battle for Winterfell, he had all the birds Send out the birds.
Yeah,
Tell
thank you
her
for reminding me.
Sorry, but we're just using it not to rant because we know it was shitty. Just like to learn something about the way that the actual Air Force is being used. To make it realistic, they could have done that. Bran is using the birds as reconnaissance, whatever, and then this is where shit is going down. This is where you can't go. Fire now, fire later. I don't know, something. It could have been.
Oh, see, so Bran, that was very frustrating for me in so many ways. For instance, why couldn't he have just taken control of the ice dragon, for example?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, but more importantly, you really bring it up because think about today's environment where what's the big threat? It's really the small Mavic, or Mavic Pro. We call them UASs, drones, small drones, right? Mm-hmm. And so, that's what he had at his disposal, and instead, they just never used him. And she could have done with the 3 dragons, had she not lost him, some high altitude reconnaissance as well. Right. But more importantly, he could have done it with his ravens or even other. Yeah. Animals, for instance, could have been mice, for heaven's sakes.
Wow, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. Think about that. They're crawling all over the city. They know everything that's going on.
Right. Here are their defenses. Most of the soldiers are concentrated here or there. This is the weak spot. Blah blah blah. That would have been so much. Could have been really cool.
It would have been very cool. It would have been a lot of fun to watch. It would have been. People would go, oh yeah, because that's why organizations are working really hard on tiny little micro robots that can do this kind of stuff, right? Now, some of them aren't using them just for, what we call ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So ISR. Yeah. But you could also use them for, everything from safety inspections of bridges and buildings, or a building's on fire and you send these things in and they're little low creepy crawlers and they can go in and give you an idea of what's going on.
How does that look?
Well,
does it actually crawl? What is it? Or like little wheels?
No, they depends.
They can go up.
They can crawl.
Stairs?
They can crawl. Oh yeah, the way that you do it's fascinating. They use there's a technology out there that's been developed, and they can basically use a version of static electricity and attach themselves to any surface, whether it's wood, glass, metal, doesn't matter. And I've actually played with it where I took it on an iPad and then activated it and then lifted the iPad, and you'd think, oh man, that's going to fry the inside of the iPad, but it doesn't.
A regular iPad.
Mm-hmm. Mine was my personal iPad.
Okay.
And if you want to see videos on it, this technology was created by a nonprofit organization called SRI International. Used to be part of Stanford University and still on the campus. And if you go to their YouTube site, you can see all kinds of videos of how they've made creepy crawly different kinds of robots. Wow. So, but Bran could have done it naturally. He didn't have to create anything. Yeah. And so it certainly wasn't, as we know, it wasn't a limitation of Bran. It was just a limitation of the creator, the showrunners. Yeah. And part of my hope is maybe there's a chance of some of these the details that we've been discussing. Maybe they'll show up in the whatever the next show is going to be called. It
will have to. Oh, okay, right. So we were talking about that. I think we were emailing about that. Mm-hmm. We should have another conversation once the next show comes up, whatever, next year, and have another conversation specifically about the Air Force, the use of the Air Force, because they're gonna base it on the Fire and Blood, the book. That's the first 150 years of the Targaryens, written by George R.R. Martin. And there's a lot of details about the way that the Targaryens use their dragons. And I would be very, very interested to hear what you have to say about that, because that's going to be way more realistic. I remember from the book how, as you mentioned before, high altitude flying to evade being shot, and then when you go down, sometimes it gets more dangerous. The way that they destroyed Harrenhal, and then later in the Dance of Dragons, when there's dragons fighting each other, you have descriptions of plane against plane, which is very, very interesting. And in the show in season 8, it was just like fighting each other, ripping each other. I don't know. It wasn't very interesting or insightful in any way.
Well, and maybe at that point, whoever is the one-eyed or three-eyed raven, right? How many eyes? Three-eyed.
Yeah,
raven.
three.
There we go.
Yeah.
Bran
only had one eye because that's why he was so lame. Okay.
Apparently. Yeah, so maybe the three-eyed raven at the time, might do some of the although I guess the Targaryens wouldn't have access to that, so that won't be a player.
Yeah. But just I don't know, just to see, have a feeling that it will be more
realistic.
Yeah. Is there any so first of all, is there anything else that you think is worthwhile discussing with the way that she used her dragon? Let's say, how about it was in season 7 episode 4 when she burned down the Lannister army. She came in with the horses at the same time.
Well, okay, so that was perfectly executed.
Okay.
And the reason why is it was a complete surprise attack. By the time they realized something was going on, it was a little late. And the other issue with Bronn's use of the scorpion is that he had one of them.
Yeah.
So when we fast forward to the second of the to the penultimate episode, we have multiple scorpions, so they're able to triangulate. And that would make it much more difficult to escape them. But because, Bran had one, he had to, and no targeting capability and no practice.
Yeah.
Right? It's just, I'm going to get on that, and do it Hollywood style.
Let's see if it works.
I'm going to point at it and I'm going to hit her, and which is absurd. Right? Now, I can buy it from the Night King because he's super natural, kind of, I guess. But Sir, wait a minute, it's Bronn of the Black.
He wasn't
Blood.
Sir there, but okay. So I have another question. What should, if anything, the defenders of King's Landing have done to better defend the city against this Air Force attack? Shouldn't have maybe more diverse a defense, anti-aircraft defense, because it just had all these scorpions doing the same thing, or this is what we have in terms of anti-aircraft strategy?
Well, the only thing that I would have, I guess, maybe done differently, because they had a lot of the scorpions, and that was smart. Okay, and clearly the monk. See, my names are Qyburn, right? Qyburn?
Yeah.
Designed all that. So clearly Qyburn was pretty smart, twisted individual. In that circle, it was okay. I would have had some in the middle of the city too. I wouldn't have made it that easy. And then the other thought would have been maybe you build some outposts, in the periphery, going on outside the city, including the ships, but not just the ships.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and maybe some fireproofing, I don't know, defenses.
Oh, yeah.
That you can't just burn them all. Something.
Yeah, but they
I don't know.
wasn't that how? Well, I guess they would have known better at that point in time, because Harrenhal was melted.
Yeah.
But at Harrenhal, they never thought about that.
Just like fireproofing, if it's possible, I don't know. But I'm guessing that it's not that easy to hit anti-aircraft missiles. I'm sure they have defenses of their own. I would guess.
Right.
So you have
Well,
no? Or-
yeah, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Okay.
In modern day warfare, the way that you can overcome some of the anti-aircraft systems is through what's called a HARM missile, which is I think it's a high anti-radiation missile. So
Okay.
this missile sniffs out the microwave or the radio signals from the radar that you have on the anti-aircraft, right?
Okay.
So the aircraft that the Air Force used them on, they were called Wild Weasels. And so the Wild Weasels would come in, fire these things off, and these missiles would just zero in on the radar sets and take them out. So I don't know what the version of that would be
Right.
in terms of the defense that they were able to do. In my mind, I was trying to think of, is there any way they could have used the green,
Yeah, the wildfire. Yeah.
the wildfire?
Yeah.
But that, look, let's back up a little bit too. Is you've still got a bunch of what we would call not prehistoric, but certainly Middle Ages type of people, and you think that they're going to get on this Scorpion and hit their targets, all of them, right? When
Right.
they haven't. I mean, because you know how modern day, from everyone from the Israeli Defense Forces to the U.S. to the Japanese and the Europeans and whatever, we practice and train and
Right.
train and train
Right.
and train.
Right. They have no practice
Now I don't.
at all. This is the first time in their lives that they've seen. They could have, yeah. They can only
They're not
throw
used-
plates and then hit the plates with Scorpion. And I think,
Yeah.
it's, yeah.
How are they going to simulate that, right, on the ground to protect against it? And so, but that goes back maybe a little bit more to D&D, because they'd had some experts. The experts could have helped them build at least somewhat of a better story that's a little more realistic, but they didn't. So maybe in the new show we'll see a little bit of that, but clearly based on what we think we know, basically the Seven Kingdoms just caved, right? I don't remember how did the I know the North did, where Sir or Lord Robin, the little
Yeah. The veil. Yeah.
the breastfeeding guy,
Yeah.
kid.
Kid.
What was at the Eyrie?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, did they cave in? Do you know the history of that part? Did they cave in? Because otherwise, it seems like
In history,
the dragons.
the way that it
yes.
happened in Fire and Blood, it was actually, it's interesting that you ask about it, because that was like the only place that was never conquered, and the way that they beat them is that one of Aegon's sister came in from above, surprisingly, boom, into the court, and took the dragon took whatever, the young princeling at the time of and she was just like, very, oh, look at this little baby, I hope nothing happens to it, something like that. And through that threat they just said, okay, we're with you. But that's very interesting, because that was like the only way to make sure that the dragons wouldn't get hit, just like a surprise landing, and then threat royalty that they would just, because otherwise, I guess because of the altitude, why would that be something so hard for aircraft to subdue? Let's say something like
Yeah.
the Eyrie. Why is that a problem?
It's not. They would go in and do what they did to Harrenhal and melt it.
Okay, so let's recap a little bit. So basically, the way that Daenerys took out all the defenses before, that's realistic. She's unfortunately a war criminal, and she had to die for her crimes. The previous, the Night King, that's also okay. We can give her a pass. they could have done a better job at like defending the city through, as you said, like also a little bit at the beginning, like in the middle of the city, and more spread out, that it won't be so easy to just take out all at the same time. She didn't do any, interesting maneuvers. Just come in low. That's also realistic from that you mentioned. And jump in any time to tie it all in.
Yeah, and I think that the other part of the recap is a lot of the missed things were the aspect of it's a team. You don't
right.
Today we don't go in and do any of this stuff that we do, whether it's a humanitarian crisis or a large scale attack. It's a team. You don't count on one of your capabilities. That's why, like I did mention the F-117s in Iraq. They were just the bleeding edge of the fight. Then they were followed up by all kinds of other things. And in the second Gulf War, I'll never forget when we went in the second time. I was sitting in a command post somewhere and watching what's called the Common Operational Picture, and so I could see what were things on a radar, and they were all B-52s and some other aircraft, and then all of a sudden you just saw dozens and dozens of other things pop up on the screen, and they were different types of missiles that they were using to take targets out. So it's just not done like that. And another thing that popped in my head while you were talking a little bit was, if you were going to the Eyrie, why would you just be one person? Why wouldn't you bring 5 or 10 of your best soldiers with you? Those dragons were huge. You can't tell me that that's impossible. Unless it was, because the last time I checked, I didn't notice that it was like Pandora, where you had to plug your biological USB port into the animal.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering. I don't want to be too critical about that, because I read it once and it was like, I don't know when it came out, 3 years ago. I don't remember. So maybe it's my fault.
Yeah, but but even if you're wrong, so what? Daenerys could have done the same thing. She could have gotten people in behind enemy lines much easier than they did. Not to mention, what Bran could have done. So, but yes, fundamentally, to recap it, she made some good use of her weapon system. We'll call Drogon a weapon system, and some poor uses of it, and a fundamental, deeply flawed misunderstanding of Airpower theory.
Right.
Because she is a little girl.
It was just like not complex, just like come in, destroy everything, boom, you win, basically.
Yeah.
That was the way it was written.
Yep.
A few months ago, which now seems like it was like from another dimension, since now like there are no more wars almost anywhere. Like we dropped a bomb on what was written in the intelligence reports in Gaza as a target, whatever, terrorist target, because Hamas, blah 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 blah. But it just wasn't updated properly. So just killed a bunch of people living in a shack or something like that. So everybody needs to be talking to everybody in order to know where are the targets, where you should aim, what are the dangers. Otherwise, it just
Well, one of the smartest things that I learned in a practical bit when I was actually doing ground combat training, which was weird for me, a space and missile officer, and I'm one day I'm in Colorado, the next day I'm in Iraq, holding a rifle and all this other stuff, right? But one of the things they taught us, which is applicable to what you just said, and even to what we were talking about with Game of Thrones, is a simple phrase that is ingrained in my head. sight picture, sight picture, sight picture, bang.
Explain.
So the explanation behind it is you mentally make yourself understand everything that's going on a couple times so that you're not just shooting at something. It provides a method of positive identification because your goal is to hit that counterforce target, that military target, not a counter value target, unless you're one of the big bad countries. And your goal is to ensure that you're carrying out whatever the actual overall strategic and tactical and political objectives are of a given fight. So when they drop that bomb, what that says to me is they should have done a better job on the intelligence side to verify, especially because in your part of the world, that's such a disaster. It's such a, not only is it a human disaster, it's also obviously a political and a public relations disaster. It sets back any kind of goal of moving things forward in a positive way, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, whatever. Just things have gone to shit in so many ways that it's hard to know where to start. But this was a beautiful conversation. I don't know if beautiful is the right adjective, but we learned a whole lot through Game of Thrones about theory of the use of Air Force. This is not the right term. The right term is
Airpower.
Airpower. Thank you. So okay, we have tabled once Fire and Blood the show comes in, but that's like in like a year. And you know what? Maybe it's even more because I don't know if they'll be able to shoot because of the coronavirus. You can't have too many people at the same in the same place. All the extras.
Oh yeah, they're holding up everything. I just read that Messiah for Netflix was canceled, and
okay, but let's think about other movies or shows that maybe we could talk through them about. Either it's the use of air power or anything else that you have related to battle and war, to have some expertise at that we can, through those movies or shows, learn something.
Yeah, maybe we could even talk about the application of space power.
Okay, let's do that.
There's a lot of interesting things. There's some films that we could talk about where I could step you through why it's unrealistic and why parts of it are and aren't, and even if that was the case, where there's still some positive to be had. But look, D&D aren't the only ones out in Hollywood who rush through things and cut budgets, because if that weren't the case, my wife wouldn't have any free minutes available in her life. But unfortunately, that's not the case. You've got to be working with top-rated talent like Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, and all that.
It has to be important for them to churn out something of quality that doesn't make you roll your eyes like, okay, what is that?
Yeah,
what is that?
Definitely. So, yeah, I would love to do that. We could, I'll have to look through some film and don't forget, we can also talk about some of the television, the great, both streaming and regular stuff that maybe everyone would have an opportunity to see or want to see, where similar things could come out of it. So, I mean, I haven't listened to everything on The Expanse that you've done because I haven't finished watching the last season. But I will just say this. I love The Expanse. I like a lot of the reality in it in terms of gravity and things like that. I'm sure there's a lot that's not very realistic. But, yeah, I would love to do that.
Okay, so about The Expanse, in season 5, whatever, that will take some time, unfortunately. So new stuff will take a lot of time until it comes out now. So I guess okay. Well, let's stay in touch through email. And thank you, Dan, for coming in.
Oh, you're welcome.
We did it. We did it.
We did it. So I'm going to hit done on the recording.
No, okay. No, not stay for
Not yet.
For
Okay.
a minute more.
Okay.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you enjoyed it and you're catching it through YouTube, then hit the like button, the subscribe button, share with your friends, whatever it is. And if you'd like to support our work, go to patreon.com/GOT Academy. Or if you prefer a one-time donation, it can be paypal.me/GOT Academy. And I would like to thank our patrons and also Dan, since you're here and you're a long time patron. I want to thank you too for your support.
Well, we really do enjoy your work. So both my wife and my son, we love watching your work. So it's always enjoyable.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. That's nice to hear.
Yep.
So,
and if anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, I'm at MOSQVICH Moskvich.
Again.
MOSQVICH.
I see. Okay, and I'll put a link. I'll write it up in the description box, so you can go and find you over there. And you have a podcast of yourself.
I do. Our podcast is called Live and Let Diecast, and we talk about model cars, diecast cars, collecting them, buying them, selling them. I'm kind of a car nut. That's the other thing I really like. Okay. And so the guys and I haven't recorded much in the last couple months because I was working on another master's degree and I finally graduated. So, hopefully now we'll, be able to do a little bit more on that. It's a very limited interest audience.
But if you are a car nut and you're interested in all this, then this is a podcast for you.
Yep, and it's Live and Let Diecast.
Live and Let Diecast. So, I'll also put a link in the description for everybody to find it out.
And it's on iTunes and all the other podcasting platforms.
Okay, awesome. So thank you, Dan. Let's stay in touch for the future.
Okay, thanks.
Bye, everybody.